Good morning and welcome. Thank you for listening to Bat Talk with Sharona. I am your host. My name is Sharona. Happy Wednesday. Happy Hump Day. We're halfway there. We're almost to the start of the NFL season. You guys, I made Cowboys fans mad yesterday. I didn't mean to, but I did. So we'll talk about that here in a little bit. We've got a big show today, 2 hour show today. First, in our first hour, we're going to talk some fantasy football. We're going to talk a little bit of politics, but mostly fantasy football and dynasty league chit chat with my friend Kevin at the FF Engineer out there in Twitter sphere. Great chat with him. We sat down on Tuesday night and had a chat, and I hope to have him back on here soon. Way too long since I've sat down with Kevin and talked fantasy football and a lot of other things with him. Great discussion with him. And then in our second hour, we'll have some fun. I got an opportunity to sit down with another one of my buddies, the husband of my boo, my bae, Sonia Greenfield, who helps co-host my Tuesday night show for NFL Female, The Zone Blitz. We're going to be coming back from hiatus soon. Sonia is on vacation right now, so stay tuned for information about that. But Greg and I sat down last night, and we talked about flossing. I am a big proponent of flossing and oral health, so you guys know that I am team flossing. Greg is not, apparently, and so we talked about flossing. We talked some politics, and then we talked about PokemonGo. So that was a fun discussion. Again, that will be played in our second hour. So we'll go 2 hours today, and then we've got another show on Friday. A lot of big stuff going on in the political arena. We're going to talk some more about politics and labels, and what does it really mean when we say Democratic or Republican or liberal or conservative anymore. The first in that series, Chopping Wood with Matt and Sharona, is going to be aired on Friday. Matt and I will sit down tonight and start and continue our discussion. Not start it, we started it last week. So I'm very excited about that. Matt's a smart guy, and it's always fun to talk to him. But again, today we're going to be talking fantasy football and a little bit of political discussion with Kevin. Here in a few minutes, we'll play that interview, and then in the second hour, some fun stuff, politics, gaming, flossing, and PokemonGo. So stay tuned in for that. All right, so before we get to Kevin's interview, so yesterday, as these things tend to go, it started rather innocuously. I was sitting, working, doing some stuff, really preparing for this show, and sort of semi keeping an eye on the old Twitter timeline, not significantly, but just a little eye out there. And one of the Cowboys beat writers, Clarence Hill, said something. I don't even remember now what it was about Jerry Jones. I think he said something about him being first ballot Hall of Fame, which, okay, I don't really, I'm not sure. I'm not really prepared to have that discussion. Is Jerry Jones first ballot Hall of Fame? Maybe. Listen, Jerry Jones, there's no question but that the Cowboys have had success over the course of their existence, right? I mean, if you know anything about me, you know that I grew up a Cowboys fan. I lived in Texas, grew up in Austin, and so I'm acute Cowboys history and what have you. And there's no question but that the Cowboys have had a lot of success. But really, what has Jerry Jones done without Jimmy Johnson or Bill Parcells? Nothing. He hasn't done shit. And I don't have any doubt that Jimmy Johnson deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. Bill Parcells, his record is fairly well established. But anyway, so and the first thing that came to my mind is, if Jerry Jones gets in before Bud Adams, I live here in Tennessee, and Of course, the Tennessee Titans are the local NFL franchise. Bud, began that franchise in Texas. Speaking of Texas, and it was the Houston Oilers, and he was part of the Foolish Club that started the AFL, which was a direct competitor to the NFL, and ultimately those two leagues merged. The modern National Football League, and so knowing that history and being aware of what Bud Adams and those fellas meant to the forming of the National Football League, in my mind, it's not even a question, but that Bud Adams deserves to be in before Jerry Jones. I mean, but it's kind of funny, and it reminds me, it's sort of funny because I got angry Cowboys fans in my mentions talking about all the championships and what have you, and it just and it reminded me Kevin Durant is still in the news and still getting a lot of flack for his decision to leave Oklahoma City and go to Golden State, and it reminded me of all the people in my mention saying, well, Kevin Durant could have won a championship with the Thunder. He didn't have to go to Golden State and blah, 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 blah. And I just know how that conversation would have gone. If Kevin Durant stayed with Oklahoma, stayed with the Thunder, and never won a championship when it came to when he retires and it comes to that discussion about how great he is, he's going to get knocked for not having any championships. I mean, and that he left to try to win, he didn't win a championship. Everybody kept saying, well, he could have won. He didn't win one, and him getting knocked for being, for wanting to win a championship when, that's what sports fans talk about. I mean, when they're talking about legacy and whatever. So it just reminded me of that, and it was kind of funny. And I absolutely do believe that Bud Adams deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. It's a travesty that he's not already in there. I understand why Ralph Wilson's in there. I understand, Eddie DiBartolo and all of that. But Adams, he was a funny cat. There's no question. But that perception hurts him, and that the fact that he was very irreverent, and toward the end of his career, he definitely had a well-earned reputation as sort of a crazy old coot. But what he did for the league, what he means for the league, and what the AFL and the Foolish Club means to the league is in my mind undisputed, and so I think that he deserves to be in there. And to me, I've been saying this for for a few years now. It's really a travesty that he's not already in there. So anyway, all right. So we're gonna take a real quick break. When we come back, I know that we just got started, but I've got to get Kevin his bumper music. Kevin, by the way, I found out last night, is a Pink fan as I am, and so we're going to get him some good bumper music, and then after we play that interview, we'll come back and follow up, and then go into our second hour. So stay tuned in. You are listening to Back Talk with Sharona. Actually, this is Back Talk. We have a second podcast now, and I'm starting to get the two confused. We do it Down and Dirty, which we do on Tuesdays. We may not do one tomorrow. We're supposed to do one on Thursday. We may not, because I've got so much going on, but we'll see. Anyway, stay tuned in. You're listening to Back Talk with Sharona. All right, welcome back. As promised, I'm joined now by one of my buddies in the fantasy football community, Kevin O'Brien. You know him out there in Twitter sphere as at the FF Engineer. He is a great football mind and just a great guy. And it's been too long. First of all, it's been too long since I've had him on the podcast, and so I'm so happy to welcome him back. And well, we had an interesting conversation on Twitter, social media. It's been about a week or so ago, and we were talking about the elections, and we were talking about TPP. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We're going to start with some fantasy talk, have some fun. So, Kevin, once again, thank you for joining me, and welcome back.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
Yeah.
Nice to talk to you again.
Yeah, it's been too long, and so I'm so happy that we're able to do this. And since it's been so long, tell everybody once again a little bit about yourself and where they can find you, find your writing, and all of that.
Yep, so these days I'm writing for DynastyLeagueFootball.com, primarily writing Dynasty fantasy football content these days. A little bit of redraft, but not as much as I used to. I think I'm down to one redraft league, and I'm in now 20 Dynasty leagues.
Yeah.
So getting up there pretty high.
Dynasty's so fun.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, it is. And regular listeners to this show know that that's kind of how I cut my teeth, so to speak. That's how I got started in fantasy football, was with a keeper league. And that's a great way to start. For those who and there's so many options now. We'll talk about that in a minute. But for those who might not be as familiar as you and I, for the average person, what is the difference between Dynasty and Keeper, and why are those leagues different from Redraft?
Yeah, so essentially in the Dynasty format, you draft a startup draft, an inaugural draft, and all the players will be available to you, similar to how a redraft league would be, and you'd have your draft, and you draft all your players. But once the season's over, you maintain that roster all the way through the off season. So through January, February, March, you still maintain those players on your roster. And unlike redraft, where you basically hit the reset button back in August and you start all over again, the keeper or the Dynasty format is you keep all of your players essentially, and it's supposed to pseudo recognize or assimilate to a real NFL team, right? So like you get like the Titans or something, right? They don't just flush their entire roster every off season.
Right.
They got all their players, and then they either sign free agents, pick up waiver wires, or we have a rookie draft. So in Dynasty League football, the big thing reoccurring every year will be that you draft in your rookies, and so you'll have a smaller subset of a draft to kind of bring in the new and upcoming talent, just like an NFL team would.
Yeah, I think I've been in Dynasty and Keeper leagues, and the first league that I had, the Keeper league that I had, we did not retain full roster rights. We had to pick, and I'm trying to think because it's been so long. This was roughly around 2005, 2006, and I think we only kept like 4 players on our roster, and then we had to throw the others back. And so you did have, some. It was kind of a combination. There was some redraft, but there's so many options now, and with the advent of commissioner software and commissioner websites and stuff, it's really been kind of an exciting explosion in the variety, don't you think?
Absolutely. I think a lot of keeper leagues used to appeal to, redraft was so big 10 years ago, and so many people were doing redraft, and the idea of you wanted to keep some of the players that you had for a long time was appealing to people, but the idea that you would monopolize basically as many players as you could in a full keeper or even a 12-team keeper or something a little bit larger, closer to Dynasty, I think a lot of home leagues didn't like that because people were ending up with Adrian Peterson for 10 years, right?
Yeah,
they were monopolizing these players.
Yeah, exactly.
Casual redraft leagues, your home leagues with your buddies, they kind of want to refresh that it's a little bit different kind of, thing to it. Where Dynasty is growing so much, people can join so many leagues and they're kind of more accessible, and, there's a little bit more of a draw in there. I liken it. I actually wrote an article. My first article at Dynasty League Football It's a free available article, not behind a paywall or anything. I actually referenced a Pink song. I don't know if you listen to Pink,
I
but
do.
there's
Yeah.
a song, Sober, how do I
Yes.
feel this good sober?
Yes.
And that's dynasty football for me.
Yeah.
How do I feel this good sober all the time? Redraft is when you're drunk,
Yeah.
but it ends, right? And so how do you feel that good when you're sober? And that for me is dynasty football. How do you enjoy that roster building and trading and all that stuff year round, right? Because it doesn't really ever stop.
Doesn't stop, and we were talking about that on the show, one of the shows that we did a few shows ago, and one of the things that appeals to me about keeper slash dynasty leagues is that it is that strategy aspect of it, because in when you're drafting and when I'm drafting in MFLs or redraft or what have you, it's kind of like chess to me, because you're not just planning for that next pick, or you're planning picks ahead, but when you're dealing with dynasty slash keepers, you're planning years ahead, as you mentioned, and it does, it really does, and it does remind me. Does it remind you of chess in a way? Are you a chess player?
I'm not a chess player, but it does have that kind of dynamic to it.
It's definitely a strategy type thing. I like to ask guys how they got started playing fantasy football and in the business. So tell us a little bit about how you got started.
So I got started fantasy football. I started in redraft, basically free league, Yahoo League, the ESPN type leagues. I started with the idea that, so I'm a Patriots fan. I live in New England, live in
Okay.
Massachusetts, and I'm a big Patriots fan. And I'd watch as a teenager, I'd watch the games, and I kind of didn't like that I didn't know the other players on the other team.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I really wanted to familiarize myself with players on the other team. So somebody had mentioned, oh, why don't you get into fantasy football, and you kind of open your eyes to players that are across the league rather than just getting familiar with the Patriot players.
Mhm.
So I started probably 1998, 2000 back then, just doing redraft leagues. And then I, just was in a home league for many years with some high school buddies. That kind of broke up and ended, and then I was doing a lot of free leagues. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I started playing Dynasty Fantasy Football. When I joined Twitter, I started Twitter about 5 years ago or so. And I met up with some guys, and we created a themed league called Seinfeld Dynasty, which we love. So it's a 14-team Dynasty Dynasty League. And it was good. We just got a good group of guys that we kept talking frequently on Twitter, and we joined the league. And from there, we just added about 8 or 9 of us respun that over, and we started a second league and then a third league, and now, as you mentioned, I'm up to 20. So,
Yeah.
and how did I start writing was I was pretty anonymous on Twitter, and I just really started looking for information, news, notes, inactives, those kind of things for my home league, which is pretty competitive. So I wasn't really looking to write or anything like that. And me and a couple of guys, we would tweet ADP. We'd redraft ADP, and we kind of, I was like 25 followers back then. It was just we're going back and forth with each other.
Right.
And the small website asked me to write just some thoughts down, so I started contributing with a small site that I don't think it's around anymore either. But anyway, it just progressed from there.
Yeah, I think that is, it kind of mirrors the trajectory path of a lot of people. Twitter, social media has really enhanced, to me, it has enhanced the experience, and I think, and I say this all the time, but it's so true, and I like to give love out to the fantasy football community, but it really is a great community.
Absolutely. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. All right, so what for those out there who are looking to either to start playing dynasty or to up their dynasty game, what are some tips or strategies that you employ to to try to win your league?
Yeah, so for me, I like to balance my rosters, and you kind of have to know what you're good at. If you're new to Dynasty, the first thing I try to do is tell people leverage what you do well in redraft. If your in-season management skills are higher than your draft skills, or maybe you're really good at picking up the waiver wire, or you're on the cusp of grabbing those players, and year after year you find yourself doing pretty good. You want to try to leverage as many of those skills as possible to the dynasty. I see too many people when they try to go from redraft to dynasty, they kind of think that it's a completely different entity, and I really want to emphasize, it's kind of like a baby step, when you go from walking to running, you don't just completely forget how to move your legs, right? You really want to leverage what you know. So in Dynasty, there's building a roster, then there's in-season management, and then there's the long term. So some people are really good at that 5-year plan, right? So they build a 5-year plan out. They actually will, so to speak, punt the first year and really get a lot of young players thinking that they can project out the trajectory of those young players to be good and have a large sample of good players, good young players that'll last them 5 years out. If you're transitioning from redraft and you're going into dynasty, you might want to be a bit more balanced when you have a little bit more veterans that you're familiar with that you know will give you good core scoring, and then supplement those in with some rookies, almost emulating more like a NFL team, right? So the Patriots, they have all their veterans and everything else, but they still try to draft well and they still try to bring up players behind it, right? So they don't ever want to be all young and all old or be too imbalanced. I really, push people trying to have a balanced roster.
Yeah, I think that's important too. What is your strategy on trades, and how do you recognize when it's time to, and say you've got a marquee guy. You mentioned Adrian Peterson before. How do you go about evaluating when it's time, to make that kind of decision?
Yeah, so with balance in my rosters, I gauge it by almost having a life cycle of my team. So if I have, say, an abundance of Adrian Peterson, Matt Forte, Jamal Charles, or Brandon Marshalls or Larry Fitzgeralds, and I have those kind of aging players that I know I may get some good peak seasons out of, but I know they're not going to last another 2 or 3 years. If so, that would be a roster where I'm not that balanced, and so I think when you get all those players at that age, that's a time where you want to start peeling off.
Right.
I'm not a big fan of dumping. So like some people say, oh, I have a really old team, I need to completely unload and sell everybody. I kind of like to sell off my expendable pieces and then backfill and then have enough youth underneath it so that you have the young guys coming up, moving into your core, and then your core is the aging group, right? So like for me, a good example would be Antonio Brown.
Right.
I have Antonio Brown in many of my leagues, and I've had him for 3 years, and he's been my core receiver. So now that he's 28, he's going to be on the back end of his career, or back nine, let's call it. I have Keenan Allen. So Keenan Allen is on the young side. He's going to come up into my core hopefully this year. I'm looking for a big breakout season from him. And then you'll draft people like, Will Fuller or Tyler Boyd or Shepard or whoever you like that's the young rookie coming up. And you kind of have that backfill. And you kind of want to have this, if you're familiar with product life cycles, you kind of want to have this one rearing up, and then you have it coming in, and then you have your youth coming in behind it for your core.
Yeah, I think that's solid, and it's really a balancing act. I completely agree, and it's hard to identify those guys. At some point, and we say this on the show a lot. Old Man Time, he's definitely undefeated, and speaking of which, I had Mike. Not even going to try to pronounce his his last name, even though he's tried to help me out so many times. I'm just so bad. I don't want to mess it up. I know you know our buddy Mike, who is also a New England Patriots fan. Mike MFL is how I call him, and we had a conversation about Tom Brady. So I'll ask you about it too. How much longer, how much more does Tom Brady have in him?
You know, it's a big topic in New England, and seems like we have this every year for the last 5 years that he was going to hit this cliff at some point.
Mm-hmm.
You look at guys like Favre, Marino,
Mm-hmm.
Elway, even Warren Moon going a little bit way back. Those guys played early 40s.
Mm-hmm.
So 42, I think, is probably on the long end.
Vinny Testaverde, who's put up fantastic. I know that he doesn't get a lot of. People are very divided on Vinny Testaverde. I think he was underrated. Okay. Anyway, but that's just another name.
Yeah, I think one of the problems you get though with the aging guys is you start with Peyton Manning is that when they're elite level, I think that when they age and they can't do what they want to do, it frustrates them to the point where they kind of give in, right? They don't want to just have mediocre seasons at their end. So I think Peyton Manning, I think that was a big part of for him why it was time to give up, because I think he was frustrated that he couldn't zip the ball the way he used to be able to. He could make the reads, but he just couldn't zip the ball physically. So I think that plays into it a lot, is that when these elite quarterbacks to the point where they can no longer zip the ball or hit the windows that they want to hit, I think that's when they internally tell themselves,
right,
I can't do this. I can't go out here and be mediocre. I can't just be no offense, Vinny Testaverde.
Right. No, I understand. But I'm just saying. I mean, if you look, but he didn't have good teams around. We're not gonna spend a lot of time. But I want to ask you, and I agree with that. We've seen some up and down, and infamously, 2 or 3 years ago, he had that mysterious possibly thumb thing that people wanted to try to key in on. I know that Jimmy Garoppolo has had an up and down camp, but do they think that he's the guy behind Tom Brady, the answer for Tom Brady?
I don't think they know yet. I mean, they kind of thought this with Mallett at one point or another, and also with Hoyer. I mean, Hoyer, when he was coming up and he was in camp for a number of seasons, he looked, felt, and talked just like Tom Brady. You thought this was a complete shadow of him, and it was going to be a carbon copy. And it really, I don't think they know themselves. I think Garoppolo and Brady are both signed through 2017, I want to say, and I think at that time they'll reset themselves, right? I don't think we kind of try to project this. I don't know that they do. I don't know that they really have an idea whether Garoppolo will be the next Tom Brady or next quarterback for the Patriots or not. So I think even they want to feel it out and see how it goes. As far as this year goes, Garoppolo's got to play 4 games, so I think that's going to give him a good indication, right? Where they gave him a basically full camp of preparation. He's going to get all the installs for the plays. It's not like he's coming in mid-season and just kind of make it work. So I think that was going to be a good test. Yeah.
But they're Wild Bill, as I like to call him. Probably. Mike and I talked about this. I have tremendous respect for Bill Belichick, and we're not going to get into any of the the weird stuff that that certain but you would expect that they would do that, and if he's going to be making mistakes, now's the time to make them.
Absolutely.
And so we'll see. I suppose I'm anxious to see him. What are they going to do? And I can't remember. Is Brady barred from the preseason games too, or can he play in them?
I imagine he won't see much time, whether he can or not.
Okay.
I don't actually know the rules, whether he can or not. I would imagine they don't play him. He typically doesn't play much anyway. I think the last few years he just played in like the 3rd preseason game for maybe a series or a quarter, maybe 2 at most.
Well, it makes sense for them to play Garoppolo and let him,
Exactly.
just
Get the
let him.
time.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. All right, so just real quick, I want to talk about TPP and some political stuff with you.
Sure.
What guys are you targeting in Dynasty, and what guys are you avoiding? And I want to ask you specifically your opinion about some Titans players, but we'll talk just in general first.
Sure. In general, some players that I'm really targeting. First, a little bit higher end. Keenan Allen right now is in the second round of startups, but I have him as a top 5 wide receiver. I really think he's the next elite receiver that we're going to be talking about in the years to come. First 8 games or so, including the one that he was injured, he was on a 300-point PPR pace. I think he'll come back and do that again with Rivers, and he's got Wisenhunt back. I don't know how you feel about Wisenhunt. In Tennessee, a little bit connection there, I think. But
Yeah.
I think as an OC, he can really come back and do well there. So I like Keenan Allen as a high end. Devontae Parker I like, but I think people are getting a little bit too excited too soon. So I think like for redraft, he's getting drafted pretty early, expecting high-end production this year. And I think, it's a little bit unfair that people are holding this fantastic 2014 class of receivers that we were littered with Beckham and Watkins and all these people, all these receivers. So I think Parker's will be a little bit slower, but I like his ceiling. So maybe not this year. This year he might be a top 36 receiver, but I think years to come, 2 or 3 years down the road, he's going to be a top 24 to top 12, and that he'll see that kind of trajectory. So I really like Parker. As we go on a little bit deeper, if you will, some guys that I like Jordan Matthews. He gets a lot of negative publicity, if you will, on drops and things like that. I really like Jordan Matthews. 2 years in the league. His numbers over those 2 years are, as a whole, are actually higher than Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson didn't have a great rookie year. Blew up last year. But over the 2 years combined, Jordan Matthews actually has a more productive 2 seasons. So I really like him. Those are some targets that I have. I still like Devontae Freeman. I liked him last year, but got creamed for liking him last year, and I'm still riding that right now.
There you go.
So
it's always good to hit
no
on a
reason
guy
to bail.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I got in early. I identified him last year, very early on, and people were like, "Oh, what do you see in him?" And I thought he was a Brian Westbrook. I really did. I think he a little, people thought he was a change of pace type back, and I think he was a pretty good runner. So I like him a lot. Still going forward. Eric Ebron a little bit later in drafts. Little injury scare there, but I think he can do good in the red zone.
Still not hearing much about that. It does sound like he was standing and walking, so we'll see how that sort of plays out. But definitely scary for Ebron owners.
Absolutely. Yeah. And now I'll segue because I really like him a lot, and I liked him before the Titans drafted him. Is Tajay Sharp?
Yeah. I own. Yeah.
So we'll segue into
these
guys. I identified him actually. So a few of my leagues are Devy leagues where you draft college players and they go into like a taxi squad.
It's pretty cool.
So yeah, it's really cool. It's a different variety, if you will.
Yeah.
So I had drafted Tajay Sharp after watching some. I was looking for some low-end flyers, some under-the-radar receivers that I could get cheap because we do auction draft for our Devy players. So I looked into him, and he has this, I don't know if you've ever seen it, he has a YouTube video out that he did for UMass when he was in college, basically how to run a route. So it's just him talking, and he's on the football field, and he tells people, in this kind of route, you want to, drive as hard as you can to the route, plant your foot, and he goes through the different mechanics of route running. And I looked at him, and I'm like, this kid is just dedicated to his craft. He may not be the most talented kid you're going to come across. He won't have all the metrics people want. They look at hand size, and they come up with all of these reasons why he's not going to be good. But I just look at people like that really hone their craft. they really, really enjoy what they do, and he takes it to heart. And I think that's coming through in camp. So
It is, yeah.
for me, when I see Sharp doing good, it's not a surprise to me because I see a kid that's worked so hard and it means so much to him. And he wants to run these good routes, and he's paying attention to detail.
He's already the best route runner on the team, they're saying.
Absolutely, and it's no surprise to me where everyone else is saying, oh no, but he doesn't have the metrics, and when I was evaluating him, he wasn't that good, and he was in a UMass offense that wasn't so great, or they come up with all these reasons, but sometimes football is just that easy. He works hard, he's good at route running, he's sure-handed, and he's basically the opposite of DGB, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
DGB is everyone wants to crown him before he's done anything.
Yes. He's I tried to tell people when the Titans drafted him, year 3 is his, to me that's his sweet spot, if you will. And so he was raw to begin with, missed an entire year of football, and he's got the physical measurements, but he's just so raw, whereas Tajay Sharp is really a polished guy. And the two Titans wide receivers, and and I try not to. Although I was a big fan of Derrick Henry, we're going to talk about him in a minute, and I didn't have any, I didn't hold back on owning into him. But the two Titans wide receivers that I've drafted this year are Tajay Sharp and Rashard Matthews. I think those are going to be the two outside, and Delaney Walker, who I know he's a tight end, but you've got to talk about him when you're talking about their receiving core, and I have him as well. So to me, those are, and I know a lot of people like DeMarco Murray, and and I'm willing to give DeMarco Murray all the credit in the world if he can stay healthy and be a lot better than he was in Philly last year.
Yeah, absolutely. So Delaney Walker, he's like the constant underappreciated tight end. It's unbelievable. Like in redraft, you can always seem to get him late, and then he does well, and people are like, oh, well, he won't do it again. And then it's like 3 years later, he's still doing well. It's like, at some point you just got to realize he's a value. I was looking real quick. I think like 6th round ADP in redraft. That's a great value. Even if he's gonna, even if you were to draft Jordan Reed or somebody earlier, like even Gronk, you can get Delaney Walker in the 6th round, throw him in your flex, and he's gonna be just as good as some of the receivers that you're gonna get. So in that round, you're looking at, like I said, Devontae Parker, who I think will be a top 36, but Delaney Walker could be a top 5 tight end. So in PPR, they might score similar points. And you can just put Walker in your flex. I like Walker a lot. Rashard Matthews, I don't know what to make out of him, to be honest with you. He had a pretty good first half of the season with Miami, and he did well. He ran some good routes. He caught the ball. He was pretty reliable. I think he was top 24 to 28 range, maybe in fantasy, in PPR. He's the kind of guy that I question whether, some of these free agent wide receivers, they pick up and go to another team, and I don't know if they'll pick up where they left off or not. Because he really wasn't on the radar before last year. He was kind of, wasn't expected to do much. And I don't know how much raw talent he is there or how much just clicked with him and Tannehill. So it's hard for me to really gauge a guy like Rashard Matthews. It's not somebody I really studied early on or expected to do well. But definitely he seems to be a starter right now with, I think the depth chart came out, give it what it is. Him and Sharp are going to be the starters.
They're going to start on the outside. You'll see Kendall.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just kind of the conventional wisdom, and certainly it's up to change. But I think that you'll see Rashard Matthews and Kendall Wright and Tajay Sharp start on the outside and Kendall Wright in the slot. And I'm really curious to see what they do with Kendall Wright. And, it's interesting. Rashard Matthews, he was a guy, and I had a couple of Dolphins players in fantasy the last couple of years, and I'm trying to think of his name, and he's so Jarvis Landry. And so, I paid attention. And, I think Rashard Matthews would have had better, more consistent numbers if he'd had a better quarterback. You know,
Yeah,
um,
it's possible.
I just, Ryan. I'm not. We'll see. We'll see what happens with Ryan Tannehill. All right, so I know that we're running short of time. Just real quick, and I know that we're not going to have a lot of time. I hope that you'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more. We've got plenty of time. It was interesting because we are going to talk about TPP, and I want to get your thoughts about it. I did a quick search today, and it's starting to become more of a conversation, and it looks like, you know, it's going to become a huge issue in congressional elections.
Yeah, absolutely. So TPP is kind of becoming a weird thing right now because nobody's really for it. Hillary kind of backed off a little bit. She
Yeah.
said, it was the famous quote that Trump keeps putting up, the gold standard, which he said I think a few years ago, which she really liked it back then. And
Well, I
then
mean, it's Obama's baby, sort of, right? Well, let me just say this: TPP is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. If you're wondering what that is, and it's kind of presented as a trade agreement, but it's really more a series of trade agreements as opposed to being just. I mean, because it has that. It's sort of it's an umbrella really for what could be more than, but it's definitely this big thing that it's been kind of Obama's baby, right?
yeah, I think it has been something he's been pushing, but I think Paul Ryan has actually been pretty on it too. He wants to get it done. It has a lot of compromise in it. I think right now the biggest problem people have with it is transparency.
Hmm.
So if you talk to like people that were traditional Bernie supporters or Hillary supporters or whoever you talk to, even Republicans, the traditional Republicans that would support someone like Paul Ryan, I think nobody likes this fast track that's going on right
Yeah,
now. They
yeah.
seem to just try to get it going in Obama's term as fast as they can,
Hmm.
and Hillary's kind of gone mum on it. I don't think she really wants to talk about it because
Oh, she doesn't.
I
Yeah,
think ultimately she likes it. I
yeah.
think there's just problem is that there's things in it
She
that
wants to get elected,
yeah,
and
of course.
it's amazing to me that people are like, oh, well, well, of course she wants to get elected, and she'd be dumb if she weren't smart. I mean, Lord, I just pulled a what's that guy who said the former quarterback who's on Trent Dilfer. I just Trent Dilfered myself. I mean, if she wasn't cognizant of these things, she'd be in trouble. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that I forget. Oh, it was Tim Kaine. Tim Kaine's come out and said that he's not going to. So he does not support it. He's gone on record. She doesn't want to go on record because she doesn't want it to become a big issue in her campaign.
And what's kind of funny now is, um, I'm kind of in the middle of politics. I'm not. I don't really consider myself a Democrat or Republican.
I
Like
don't either.
I really am open. I don't really care about parties anymore. I just follow the issues, and then align with the issues. I very rarely vote party lines.
But let me ask you this, and I'll let you finish that. But before we get there, are the labels Democratic and we've been talking about that on this show. The labels Democratic and Republican they mean butkus anymore, because and we talked about this last week. Barack Obama could easily have run as a Bush Republican, except that
Maybe. I mean, maybe. I
but
mean,
except that
Obamacare is a pretty big
it
leftist
started
social
no
platform,
it's
but
the Republican initiative. It's
the
it's
Heritage Foundation originally I did it, and I live in Massachusetts. I know I'm very familiar with what Romney did. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but Romney pushed. We were mandated years ago. When I file my taxes in Massachusetts, I actually have to provide proof that I have health insurance, and that started under Romney when he was the governor, and he was Republican. There's no hiding that. And the concept behind it was, I don't know if people realize this, but the Heritage Foundation, Republican think tank, came out and they, for an interesting angle to socialized medicine, they came out with it that it's fiscally responsible to not have people go into emergency rooms without health insurance because they didn't want to pay for the
So
poor just showing
crazy.
up. So fundamentally, it actually is a Republican concept because of that reason, which is just funny because now they don't support it at all.
Yeah. I mean, it is crazy, and that's why I think you and I talked about this a little bit before we got started recording. I mean, the Democratic Party is far more centrist than they get credit for, and I think you and I can agree certainly that Obama is a centrist.
He has policies that can be centrist. I don't think anybody that's on the right would probably agree with that, but people on the left, people on the left will say that, right? So, I mean, they'll say. I mean, this is like just degrees of left. I think Hillary is more moderate than Obama, I would say.
Yeah.
And
the Clintons definitely were centrist, no question. They are the ones who really moved the Democratic Party to the center.
Yeah, and I think one thing that was a dynamic in this election that really kind of bothers me as an American is that it's just as an American voter. One thing that bothers me is that with Trump being such a non-good candidate,
terrible. You can say terrible.
and I don't mean this as like a partisan thing. I just mean it as I believe in a yin and yang. I believe that when you have two good parties, they move each other to the center, and it's better for all of America. And the problem now is Bernie is a stronger candidate than Trump, which moves Clinton to the left, because now she's more concerned about his electorate rather than what his voters are bringing. So say he's in the 30% range of Americans. I think Bernie would appeal to a bigger piece of the pie, and she's more worried about getting those people. So now she's talking about free college. She's talking about many more leftist ideas, right? And that kind of pulls her away from center, right?
And she's afraid she's going to lose those voters to to the Jill Steins or the who's the other, the David Johnson isn't that the other? And there's a new guy who's coming in, a split vote, and I've always said this, feel free to disagree. But I think a split vote hurts Hillary far more than it hurts Trump. Trump's he's got his core, the bigots and the the I don't want to call them the crazies, but you know what I mean.
Well, something that we can't kind of ignore is that I think that's true in the general election, but I think that's less true when you look at the electoral map, and that like there's a ton of Bernie people in California, say. Mm-hmm. But that's a blue state. I don't care how many Bernie people there are. It's not turning red. Just California is not going to turn red. Massachusetts is not turning red, and there's a lot of support. Elizabeth Warren's from Massachusetts. She ran a ton on basically an anti-Hillary type campaign. I mean, people from Massachusetts know Warren well. She ran anti-Wall Street, corporate donor, completely anti-Hillary platform. And so the Bernie people in Massachusetts, suffice to say, what I'm trying to get at is that I think there's a lot of Bernie supporters, but it doesn't really matter what they do because they're in states that are going to be blue no matter what. Vermont's not turning blue, right? So you're really looking at these, like Ohio. You're looking at Ohio, Florida, Pennsylvania. Those are the battleground states, and I don't know how much Bernie support there really is there.
I like Liz Warren, and do you agree the sort of the conventional wisdom is that secretly Hillary Clinton and Liz Warren despise each other?
Absolutely. There's no question in my mind because Warren ran in Massachusetts, and she was big time. She hates everything. She hates what Hillary Clinton is and isn't, right? That's big for her, and for her to like stand up with her and campaign with her is like, to me it's like, oh my God, this is like worlds colliding. What is going on here?
It was kind of surreal. But Meg Whitman, you're seeing Meg Whitman, who's a big-time Republican, a big fundraiser for the Republican Party. She's going to support Hillary Clinton and is going to raise money for her. And it's so true. Politics makes for strange bedfellows, and we're definitely seeing that in this campaign cycle. And it's fascinating to me. And if the if the end result wasn't so serious, I feel a lot better now. For a long time, I was really scared that this country was going to elect Donald Trump, and I feel a little bit better about it now. But we still got a lot of time to go.
There is quite a bit of time left. So let me flip you one question on you.
Sure.
Do you think that these Republicans breaking against Trump helps or hurts him? Because he's running it that he doesn't want these people.
Oh, I think it hurts him. There's no question but that. Because you have one person break party ranks, then another person's going to be more willing to break. And you're seeing that. You did definitely start to see a little bit of, and it's kind of slowed now. But having Meg Whitman break, because...
Did you see today the 50 GOP national...
Yes. I did see
officers?
that. I had forgotten about that. Yeah, that came out. Well, the CIA director coming out and saying that he was legitimately a security threat and shouldn't be. So yeah, I had forgotten about that. It did kind of, but yeah, I think that it definitely, does help her. And and I think that, for me, as a woman, I welcomed seeing what Meg Whitman did, because I've for several years now, I have sat back and I've watched the Republican Party, and I've been like, why aren't these women speaking up? If anything can come, and I completely agree with how you started this conversation, this political discussion, and we'll end it on this. But a healthy two-party system is good for America, but the Republican Party hasn't been healthy for a while, and I've wanted these women to speak up and do something, and I'm hopeful that if anything comes out of this election that they will.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Oh, Kevin, it's been so great. I hope that you'll come back. I kept you far too long, but it was such a great conversation. Tell everybody once again where they can find you out in Twitter, the Twitter sphere, if you have a Facebook, if you have any other social media, where they can find your work.
Yeah, sure. So on Twitter, I'm the_FF_engineer. And maybe the easiest way to find my work is I got a website that I created to centralize my stuff.
Oh, cool. Very good.
So it's thefFengineer.com. Pretty simple.
Awesome. Very good. Give him a follow. He's great. He's really fun to interact with. Have a wonderful evening, and hopefully we can talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharona. Take it easy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Just like fire. I know that I'm running out of time. I want it all. And I'm wishing they stop trying to turn me off. I want it all. And I'm walking on a wire, trying to go higher. No, I don't believe you when you say don't come around here no more. I won't remind you. You said.
All right, welcome back. As promised, I'm joined now by Greg Greenfield. Greg's been on the show before. It's been a while. I'm so glad that we're getting an opportunity to do this. Despite his bad opinions about flossing, we always have a lot of fun on this show, and so we'll see what he has to say. We're going to talk some politics. We'll talk some gaming. You guys know I'm always down to talk some gaming. We are going to talk about flossing. And
I have no idea why you hate science so much. But
I have no idea why you love having. I have no idea why you love having old food and plaque between your teeth.
We're going to get into this. Let's not spoil it, because that'll take up the entire show right there. The science behind you people who insist on flossing.
Well, all right. Well, before we get there, let's start with some intros. And Greg is the currently. We'll see how long that lasts with his bad oral hygiene. But he is the husband of my boo, Sonia Greenfield, who co-hosts my Tuesday night NFL female show entitled The Zone Blitz. And Sonia's been on this show before. In fact, Sonia was my very first co-host for this podcast. So, and we need to get her back on here. So, Greg, come on in here. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself. Once again, just reintroduce yourself, and then we'll jump right into your bad takes on flossing.
Yeah, being married to Sonia is probably my only real credential. So I'm riding that for all it is worth. But nope, I'm the other half of Mom23RN, so I'm the dad component of that mommy component. We're living here in beautiful, scenic Ann Arbor, enjoying a beautiful summer.
It sounds like you're moving, though. Is that right?
You can find me. Yeah, but we're just moving down the block. We're gonna try to build a house next. So we're downsizing to upsize. Before we start moving on up, we're gonna move on down. So that's what I'm doing right now. In between brushing my teeth and rinsing my mouth and not flossing, I'm packing boxes. Enough about me. Let's talk about the issues. Let's really get into this.
Let's do. So an article came out. I did not read the article because I am team stay woke, and I knew that it was bad science, and that it would very quickly. We're still waiting for it to be debunked, but it's going to be debunked. Yeah. But basically, it was saying the general gist is that flossing is bad. Which, of course, it's not. I mean, come on now. Common sense tells you.
There it is, off the top with the bad science and misinformation. It did not say that flossing. Unlike you, I actually read the article and I read the science behind the article because I was curious to know, well, why? How did they come to this conclusion? It does not say that flossing is bad.
Okay.
The idea here is that it doesn't have any effect. So you can floss if you want to. It's just not doing the things that you think that it does.
Now listen. Let me just stop you there. It has an effect. It removes old food and plaque from between your teeth, thereby making your mouth better. I mean, this is not even debatable.
No, well, here's the thing.
All right.
This is what the study showed. They took a look at folks who floss regularly, and they took a look at folks who don't, right, who don't floss ever. And what they found in their checkups was that there was negligible difference in their gums, in their oral hygiene, in the health of their teeth, in terms of cavities, plaque buildup, calculus, all that other stuff. So yes, if you're digging in between your teeth with this piece of floss, you can remove things that are there. That is true. No one's denying that. I think anyone who's ever flossed has gone in there and pulled something out. They're like, oh gosh, I can't believe that crap was between my teeth. But if you're brushing regularly and you're really doing all that you need to do, and the stuff that you're removing is stuff that's probably going to come out anyway, you're just kind of forcing it out as opposed to letting it sort of come out naturally. Because I can guarantee you, if you're brushing your teeth on a regular basis and you stop flossing for a month, and then you go back and floss, you're not going to pull out like meat and lettuce and all kinds of stuff from a month ago in between your teeth.
How do you know? I mean, you don't know that.
I challenge you to do it then.
Well,
I think if you hate the science that much.
Let me just stop you right there and let me ask you this. Do you floss at all?
What's funny is I do.
Okay.
So,
and when you floss, what do you pull things from between your teeth?
Yeah, I think everybody does, right? I mean, it's not like you don't ever find anything in between your teeth. I use those little floss/pick things, these little plastic disposable flossing things. And
those are the bomb.
Yeah, I mean, you feel like you're accomplishing something, but and you can make your gums bleed from just sawing away at your gum because there's nothing there, and you're just in there trying to polish in between there. But I think if you're brushing properly, and this is the other thing that came up in the study, and I have a very good friend who's an oral surgeon who is always on top of all things oral. There's a better way to phrase that, I guess. But the point is that he's always talking to us about like dentistry and those types of things. And his whole thing is the same thing that the study kind of concluded was, if you focus on brushing your gums and teeth properly and not necessarily people who brush using improper technique and all those other things, but it's the point of flossing. You're not doing anything. And that gets back to what I was saying earlier, that it's more of a cosmetic thing. If it makes you feel better, then feel free to do it, but you're not doing yourself a disservice by not flossing, nor is anyone, putting themselves in a different hygiene category because they don't floss. It's like, once again, if you choose to shave your legs, great. If you choose not to shave your legs, that's fine too. I mean, it doesn't make you any worse of a person. It's just, it's a preference.
Well, and I think that if we're talking preferences, most people would agree that they would prefer someone who shaves and flosses, right? Because they're cosmetically, I mean, yeah,
I think that's.
You don't have to shower, but I don't want to be around your ass if you don't.
I don't think that showering is out. So now you're going too far.
No,
yes,
I don't think so. And in fact, I need to schedule an appointment with my own dentist. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to ask said dentist what said dentist thinks about this bull hockey study that indicates that flossing isn't good for you.
It's once again it's for you. It just doesn't make a difference. Look, if flossing were making your gums healthier, the study would probably show that those people would have fewer incidences of disease, fewer incidences of any kind of issues that you would see with bad oral hygiene, and they didn't. It was the same. It was the same. And if you put 100 people in the room and 50 of them flossed and 50 of them the point is your didn't will tell the difference between who was who. Other than the fact that, they're going in there with the water pick. And that's the other thing, too. If flossing is so good for you, why doesn't your dentist do it? If you go and get a tooth cleaning, your dentist isn't in there flossing in between the teeth. They go with the water pick, which doesn't really do much. But,
that's because they rely on the dental hygienist to do that. The pick is just it's an examination tool.
Sure, but when you go in for a cleaning, when they clean your teeth?
Do what now? You're cutting out a little bit.
Okay. No, your dentist, when you go for cleaning, doesn't break out the dental floss and floss in between your teeth. The hygienist doesn't do it. Nobody floss. You've never had anyone else floss your teeth for you.
My dental hygienist flosses, yes.
What?
Hell yeah.
What type of insane dentistry?
Every single dental hygienist I've ever had has flossed my teeth.
Yeah, we're just from two separate worlds. You're from the other side of the flossing tracks.
I'm from the people who care about oral hygiene tracks. I mean, this is important. Flossing is important. Removing the bad stuff from between your teeth and preventing plaque buildup. And that's the other thing. It does build up. I'm absolutely convinced that this entire study is going to be shown for the trash that it is.
Well, you kind of nailed it. So far, no one's been able to refute it.
Well, it's only been like 2 weeks.
I mean, when you look at it, no one's been able to point to a flaw in the study, and I think that's the point. Is if the study is sound, and it's a pretty simple study. It's really kind of like high school science fair level, science. I mean, we're not talking rocket science here. You take a number of people, you figure out who the control group is, you change one variable, and you compare the results. Well, and the results are basically the same. So, trust me, if there was a study that showed that it didn't matter if you exercised or if you did exercise, I think everyone would say, okay, that's malarkey. That study is terrible. For the folks who floss on a regular basis, who've never not flossed, they don't know whether or not, there's going to be anything stuck in between your teeth. But stuff comes out from between your teeth when you're brushing all the time too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one's not a substitute for the other.
Right. And so that's all I'm saying. It's just, that 5 minutes you're spending flossing, if you spent that 5 minutes doing some additional brushing, you're probably accomplishing the exact same.
I completely, I don't agree with that. But we're going to go ahead and move on because there's a lot going on right now in the political sphere, and one of the interviews that we'll be playing on today's show, and we're recording this on Tuesday night. I have to stop and think. The days tend to run together anymore because I'm back at it. We're podcasting and whatnot again, and so the days were kind of running together. It is Tuesday night. We're doing this interview for the Wednesday podcast, and as the day went on today, if you were paying any attention to social media, you know that we're living in kind of crazy times, and Donald Trump had, as he often does, had something to say that ended up being rather controversial. And, and we're going to get Greg because Greg's been in the political arena, we're going to get him to weigh in on that. But I just have to say, and we talk about the politics in the election a lot, but, one of I think that this is part of it. One of the intended consequences of what he does is all this free advertising that he gets.
There's that.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The funny thing about the attention that he gets and how much he seems to have sway with the media, and how much he has now really become the main attraction of this entire election cycle. Is that we're not really 100% sure what, or at least if you're like me, you're not 100% sure what his true end game is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to win.
I don't think he wants to win either. I really don't think he wants the job. I mean, he wants the attention, but I'm literally terrified of what he would do if he got the job.
I think that he sees the advantage of winning the Republican primary. I think he sees the advantage of even perhaps winning the presidency.
What advantage would there be in it for him besides, him getting the power rush that he seems to enjoy?
Well, I mean, there's no better job in the world than being the president of the United States. So obviously there's an advantage. I mean, if you have the choice of being the president or not being the president, you're going to choose to be the president every time because you won't have an opportunity to do it again. And we've talked about in my circles what the long game for Donald Trump actually is. And without getting into his entire backstory and with the Democratic Party before he became the nominee of the Republican Party and all those other things, I've really kind of boiled down to two possibilities. There's two distinct things that are happening.
Okay.
One is he is simply, like you alluded to, just taking all of this free advertising, making himself into the world's biggest celebrity,
yes.
Whether you love him or hate him. And then he can, after the election is over, he will be able to flip that into some very lucrative opportunities, particularly going
like
who
what?
Donald Trump was. Well,
like what,
I mean,
though?
Okay, this is really Sarah Palin on steroids at the end of the day. Sarah Palin went from a nobody that nobody knew who she was to this highly marketable voice of the conservative movement of the Republican Party, not totally embraced by the entire party, but I mean, no one is totally embraced by the Republicans anymore. They're pretty fractured as it is. But she was able to leverage being not presidency on the ticket to an entire career outside of politics. She became a commentator. She's making way more money now than she ever was as the governor of Alaska. So, I mean, there's a lot to be said about what Donald Trump might be able to do post this election, particularly when you figure he's tapped into a core group of followers now.
Now that we'll agree on. Yeah.
With people who will continue to follow him and see him as a messiah, regardless of whether or not he even delves back into politics. It's important in today's America to have sway over people. Mm-hmm. And if Donald Trump tweets something, people are going to see it. And if Donald Trump says do something, there are millions of Americans that are going to do it. If Donald Trump says believe something, there are millions of Americans who are going to believe it. Now, unfortunately, these people aren't for marketing purposes. I mean, they tend to be uneducated. They tend to be lower wage earners. They tend to be in parts of the country that most people don't associate with marketable opportunities. But that's not all of them. I mean, that's some of them, but that's not all of them. So he's certainly going to have sway in places that he might be able to monetize fairly easily once this is all over. We don't know. I mean, heck, he's more or less, he could create his own news network for all we know, and think of how many people on the conservative side would flock to it. You know, I mean, Trump News would be just as big, if not bigger, than Fox News if he were to launch it in the next 12 months. But that's, I don't know that he'll do that, but those are the types of opportunities that await him. I mean, certainly he's not going to go back to, you know, The Apprentice or anything like that. I think he's grown his star beyond, and if he does get back on television, the ratings will be through the roof. I mean, the ratings are already through the roof no matter where he goes. And anytime he speaks, it's the political event. So, yeah, I do feel as though he's got some options there. So that's one possibility. The other possibility, you know, and when I was working on campaigns years ago, this was one of the things that we kind of talked about, particularly when I first got into Michigan, and I was around when Kwame Kilpatrick was beginning his career, and we talked about some of that because his mother was already in Congress, him becoming after having been a state rep in the Michigan legislature, they started already talking about how they could leverage this legacy. This was a campaign night. This was election night. They're already talking about it, and they already had these visions of being, you know, the Kennedys. I do think that based on the response to his kids, this could, the long con here could be that Junior gets elevated, very electable position, you know, in 2 to 4 years, rather, and perhaps even could run himself. You know, I mean, when you compare how most people respond, particularly moderates and even liberals respond to Donald Trump, to how they were able to respond to Ivanka and her speech, you know, and how much more palatable everything sounded and how much more reasonable everything sounded. I mean, he could be setting up his kids to have much bigger, more lucrative careers if he hadn't run for presidency and, you know, done all these crazy things to draw all the attention.
Oh, I definitely think that we'll see his kids do something, you know, politically, which is a scary thing. But again, I ask you, he's done The Apprentice. He's got, you know, I mean, we could spend an entire day talking about the successes and failures of his, you know, business entities, his business empire, so to speak. What will after all of this? What will the only thing I can think of? I mean, will he, you know, do some sort of trash show on Fox, or I mean, what will satisfy him?
Well, the one thing about Donald Trump is that whether you love him or hate him, he certainly knows how to keep himself on top of, on the winning side of a negotiation. He tends to walk away winning more than he loses. Even through the bankruptcies and failures of his businesses, it never prevented him, none of those things prevented him from moving on to his next project. Something that obviously for a lot of us, you know, heck, one bankruptcy can be life-ruining for the average American. This guy just, you know, builds and destroys all the time. And he's made an entire living doing it, a very lucrative one. So I don't know that the next evolution for him is that same thing. I think that the next evolution is going to be something completely different that will probably surprise a lot of people. I don't know that he's crazy. I don't believe he's crazy. I think he's a showman. I think he's shrewd. I think this is all an act. I refuse to believe that this man is insane. I just don't buy it, you know, because insane people don't do things that are so calculated and so well thought out.
I think he's a megalomaniac. I mean, and personality disorders. It's and I've talked about that on the show before. It's such a fine line. You know, personality disorders are in, or a psychiatric diagnosis, and you know, what we identify commonly as, you know, narcissism and, you know, other things that we sort of tend, you know, speaking of cosmetics, tend to think of as a kind of a cosmetic thing. I mean, you can look in the book, I think it's called the DSMV, and it's really kind of scary and fun to look at it. I've spent a lot of years looking at it, and you can identify personality traits that you possess. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I do think that he is a megalomaniac. Would you disagree with that?
The guy is clearly driven by his ego, and that's one of the reasons why to try to determine what his actual end game is, right? Because you could see a scenario where Donald Trump does believe that he's qualified to be president, even though it is very clear he's not qualified. It's very easy to sit back and envision Donald having a conversation with himself in his own mind about all of the reasons why he is qualified, and not just qualified for the job, why he's more qualified than Hillary Clinton, right? So, I mean, it's not even a question of, am I qualified? Of course I'm qualified. And the only reason I won't win is because they're going to steal the election, and there's crazy things happening with voter ID laws, and he's stirring the pot in ways to keep people engaged. But the thing of it is that you can only go so far with anger, and people will only show up so long because they're angry, because ultimately angry turns to angry voters. Apathetic voters after a while, because nothing changes, and our system isn't designed to change quickly. I mean, when you look at some of the things that are happening from a social justice standpoint today, there's some of the same things that we were dealing with 50 years ago, 60 years ago, right? Things don't happen that fast. I mean, they happen in increments, and we keep moving the ball down the field, but it's not going to be a situation where someone's going to come in and make this deal or come up with this landmark piece of legislation and things are going to just change overnight. Obamacare is a great example of that. It's a huge piece of legislation, but at the end of the day, did it really affect a lot of people the way that they thought it would? Even the folks who were for it, the folks who were against it, all those folks. If you already had health care coverage, you didn't really see a huge difference. If you didn't have health care coverage, it's probably a lot of people who were in that arena who didn't have it, couldn't afford it, now have an avenue for it, but it's not really cheap. And, it's you still have people who are now having to make the decision of, can I afford to pay for this, which was always the case, right? So in time, these things kind of happen on their own as society becomes more evolved. Certain attitudes, new attitudes develop, and we just kind of go through that matriculation process, where at some point today's most liberal attitudes are going to be considered very, very conservative or old-fashioned ideas, and there'll be something that comes along to replace them. That's just how it works. In that setting, Donald Trump isn't going to be any worse than any other terrible president, right? And now there have been some bad presidents, but I think
now we're just going to have to disagree, but we're not going to have time to really go into that. I mean, I think Donald Trump would be disastrous as a president, and I'm not sure this country would survive it. But maybe
that's why we have a Congress, and we can talk about that some other time. And there's limits to how much one man can do.
Well, I mean, there certainly are, but do you think that he's going to respect that? He doesn't respect any other limit. Why would he respect any of that?
Once again, I don't think
he doesn't have boundaries. He doesn't understand boundaries. I mean, he would gladly sell us for his own means. He doesn't know what it means to be an American. He doesn't have any idea, except for the Second Amendment, what is in the Constitution. He has no clue about how our government works. I mean, it would be awful in every way imaginable. We're going to take we're going to take a real quick break. When we come back, I'm going to let Greg. I gave him an opportunity to sell me on the non-flossing thing. I'm not convinced, but I'm going to let him give me the hard sell on Pokemon Go. So stay tuned in. You're listening to Bat Talk with Sharona.
Just like fire, fire.
All right, welcome back. All right, so we got to have some fun now. We'll definitely have you come back, and we'll carry on this conversation about Donald Trump and about our election.
President Trump.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, let's not have that. If the worst does come to pass, don't bother trying to call me because I won't be in the country anymore.
Well, it's kind of crazy. All right, so I take it that you are a you're a pokester. You poke, and
we prefer to be called Pokemon Masters.
Okay, whatever. So I never got into the Pokemon phenom. I just wasn't a pokey person. You know, I don't like to be poked on Facebook. Don't poke me. So give me the hard sell. Why? And you know, I'm a big time gamer. Tell me what I've missed. Why would I even consider taking it up at this stage in the game?
Because it is fun. And at the end of the day, that's what all games aim to be, right? And I think if you've never played Pokemon, if you weren't into it when it first hit, you know, back in the 90s when it was a huge deal, you're not going to get the nostalgia hit that so many players, I think, are getting, particularly these millennials who were a big thing and they remember the cards, they remember all these other things. So, yes, a lot of this is driven by nostalgia, but it's a really fun game. It's easy to play. You can play it anywhere. And it combines a couple of different elements that I think you just need to get used to because they're going to be the future.
Like what?
Well, the first one, the biggest one, the most obvious one is just mobile gaming.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, mobile gaming, as it continues to evolve, is going to be something we're going to be doing more and more. Folks like you and I who, you know, would like to sit down and play our Xbox or play the PlayStation, sitting and more getting up and moving. And the idea of PokemonGo really works well with what we think the future is going to be in terms of mobile platforms. But
see, I don't know. And I know because you know that I game and I write about gaming and all that. And I know that there is a train of thought, a thought process that suggests that at some point consoles will be obsolete, but you know, I think what we're seeing now is that console makers are moving toward consolidating those two things, and what you can play on your console, you're going to be ultimately you'll be able to take with you through your mobile phone or through a streaming type service, and you know, with Connect and whatever, and with more advances in virtual reality, I mean, the possibilities are limitless.
Right, and it's so great. It does a great job of working in the VR overlay. There's nothing quite as cool as being able to look through your phone into an actual setting and see a Pokemon there. It's just really well done. It's kind of clever how they pulled it all together to make it fun, to make it fresh. There's nothing like it out there right now. There's not another game that you can play that's quite like PokemonGo. And it's got legs, man. I mean, it's not the sort of game that is going to ultimately go away. The revenues on this thing just keep going up and up and up. More and more countries. People are in love with the game. And it's something you can do with your family, your friends. You can do it casually while you're, you know, waiting for a train or at an airport, waiting for dinner, whatever. I mean, it's so easy to play, so easy to pick it up, put it down. I think it fits well with where the future of gaming is going. And casual gaming, mobile gaming are all going to become bigger and bigger segments. And hardcore gamers, whether they are the PC hardcore gamer or the console hardcore gamer, who only want to play, you know, AAA titles that take, you know, years to develop, those folks aren't going to have quite the same return as somebody who's going to be able to pick up your game for free and purchases, and ultimately probably wind up spending more on the game over its life cycle than the people who are picking up these titles, particularly if they're getting them at a discount. You know, it's just there's a lot to get behind the entire
I see it more as a supplement as opposed to being a replacement, if that makes any sense. I mean, I can see, and I've played mobile games. I mean, who hasn't played, you know, some sort of game on your phone or whatever while you're waiting in a doctor's office or, you know, whatever. So, you know, and I understand, you know, it's definitely a movement and a wave. I wonder how long PokemonGo is going to, I mean, it's kind of like the next fad thing, and I wonder what kind of staying power it has.
Fair enough question, but I feel like it's going to be around for a while. I don't see this going away. And when you look at things like, Clash of Clans and all that kind of stuff, that games that have been around for a while, I don't think that this is going to kind of peter out like Candy Crush. I think that the brand is huge. I mean, hundreds of millions of kids grew up with Pokemon, grew up collecting them, and always kind of envisioned at some point, being able to catch them all, right? That was the whole thing. So now that you can do that as an adult, like getting to play with my kids is fun. Going out and collecting is fun. And the way that the game drives foot traffic, I think, is the other big part of this, the second piece of it. Because you need to go to actual locations to catch the best Pokemon and have the easiest time catching them. It's a tremendous driver of foot traffic, and I think it can completely revolutionize how small businesses advertise. One of my clients is a guy that owns a comic book store who was huge into Pokemon and importing them into the States back in the 90s. He has a location at his store where he can just sit there and for, I think it's less than $2 an hour, attract Pokemon. And these players come to the store to collect the Pokemon. And while they're there, they'll pick up some comics, they'll do some other stuff because they were going to do that anyway. But it drives foot traffic, and it's so much cheaper than traditional advertising. It's really disruptive potentially to how we even envision marketing, right? Because what is the thing that we've learned to hate more than anything else? Commercials. We don't like being sold anything. And it doesn't feel like we're being sold something when you play Pokemon Go. But when I'm going to a bar for the first time ever because it's a Pokestop and I've never been there, or I'm making a decision where to have lunch, well, this place has a Pokestop and this place doesn't, so I'm going to go and spend a half hour eating lunch and playing Pokemon, right, at this location because it has a Pokestop. It's really potentially high. I think that there's a lot to like about it.
Basically, it's just another branding deal.
Not
hey,
really.
Catch a Pokemon and buy something.
Not really, because not all the places that you can go and catch these things are places you can even buy. Here's the
okay. Well, let me ask you this though: are there any pokes? What do you call them?
They're Pokemon.
Are there any Pokemon way out in BFE where there's nothing around?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Here's the story of how the game even came about. There was a game at one point called Ingress that Niantic, the company that makes this game, did originally. And it was basically a giant beta test. And what it was kind of like Foursquare. You go in some place and you kind of check in. And so what happened was all the places that people would go would be places that were of interest to them. So like here in Ann Arbor.
I dumped Foursquare when it became whatever it became after that and was dumb.
Yeah. And with Ingress, people would go to places where there was particular arts or they would go to these places. And those places ultimately became these Pokestops and these gyms. So me and the kids went collecting Pokemon at a graveyard the other day, right? Mm-hmm. Because someone had made all these stops at all the very interesting, ornate tombstones. So you're watching a cemetery that has virtually no traffic, suddenly just a circle of cars as people are circling around, driving real slow, collecting all the Pokemon, and then they leave. It's just like a non-stop loop of traffic. So yes,
sounds insane.
There, but it's not in traffic.
Oh, all right. Well, I mean, if that's your thing, hey, I mean, more power to you and all of that. I'm perfectly happy sitting here, playing, whatever. By the way, I want to play this new game, but apparently it is only available on, you can only stream it on Windows 10 or on the PS4, which I do not have. And it's No Man's Land, I think is what it's called.
No Man's Sky.
No Man's Sky, yes. Which reminds me so much of Mass Effect, right? And so like a chill version, I suppose, of Mass Effect. So I totally want to play it.
Yeah, I think these open world type games are becoming so common.
But that's what appeals to me. I mean, that's what appeals to me.
No, I think that there are a lot of people who like those things. I tell you, I like a good campaign. I'm the sort of guy that I don't want to spend too much time on the sticks when I play. I want to power through a campaign. Okay, I got the experience of completing this game. I'm one of those guys that likes to 100% complete the game. And then if I enjoyed it, I'll play it again.
I'm a completionist too. Yeah, I mean, I'm a completionist. I like to, but I don't feel like I have to. I want to experience the game, and so like I waste countless hours just running around looking at things, looking for things, looking at things, and I don't feel like I have to rush through it. So I mean, I guess we're just different type of gamers and what have you. All right, so unfortunately we're running out of time, and because we are only going to do a 2-hour show, we're going to have to call it quits. So I hope that you will come back soon and we can finish. Maybe by that time the poor science behind this flossing stuff will have been completely and thoroughly debunked, and we can talk about that. And maybe you can continue to try to convince me that I should try to catch a pokey somewhere or another. Poke, poke, poke. I don't know. So, tell everybody where they can find you out there on social media.
Sure. You guys can find me on Twitter at NoKidsAnd3Money. That's no kids and the number 3 money. You can also, I think you can also find me the same place on Instagram if you guys are Instagramming. Avoiding Snapchat for a while with everything that happened with Draymond Green. I think it's best that I stay away for a little bit. And but you can probably find me there at the same name. So no kids, follow me. Everyone follow me. We'll go have some Pokemon together. It'll be great.
When's my boo going to be back?
Who cares?
No,
Saturday.
I'm going to tell her you said that.
Saturday, she'll be back.
All right.
After all the moving's done, she'll be right here.
She's a smart woman. That's why I love her so much. All right, we'll give her a big old hug when she gets back, and thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
All right, night.
Thanks.